Welcome back, my friends. Today I'm going to be showing you how I built my gravity well, which is the Black Mirror B3K circuit board from PCB Guitar Mania, and I got this kit from Das Musikding in Germany. If you just want to hear what it sounds like, check out this pinned video. I've got a full demo in a mix and isolated showing off lots of different tones with this pedal. It's a great sounding unit. If you haven't already guessed, the Black Mirror is a nice clone of the Darkglass Microtubes B3K bass overdrive pedal. This kit did come with all the resistors and capacitors labeled, and that's quite a nice thing. The values can be a bit esoteric to read, especially with resistors. They have colored bands. If you can read it, great, you may not care, but you also may not be buying parts from kits. Either way, that makes this kit nice and easy to use, and there are instructions available for it from PCB Guitar Mania. The instructions are pretty well done. They're not quite as newbie-friendly as build your own clone, but the instructions are clear enough, and this is a bit more of an advanced pedal, so if this is your first ever build and you're considering this one, I would urge you to maybe try something simpler like Easy Overdrive or Fuzz Kit. This one is not terribly difficult, but there is some SMD soldering involved, which takes a steady hand, and there's more components than you'll see in a lot of simpler circuits, so it takes longer to build, easier for things to go wrong. I did originally have to do some troubleshooting, which scared me a little bit, but I will go into what that was, and you can easily avoid that. I paid somewhere around $50 US for this kit. It does ship from Germany, and so I did have to pay a little bit for shipping, but all in all, it's a fair price for a really great pedal, and quite a lot cheaper than a Darkglass. As you can see, it's a high-quality circuit board, everything is clearly labeled, and all the components that came with this kit were of great quality. The first order of business here was installing these tiny little SMD transistors. Now, this kit does allow for the use of through-hole transistors, but perhaps they were more expensive or not as high-quality sounding. I don't know. I've never done SMD soldering, so this was a first, but with the help of a magnifying glass and some tweezers, I was able to get them in no problem. It's a bit of a tricky soldering job, but as long as you're careful, you can handle it. That was the only SMD components, and they are quite tiny, but they do get smaller than that. Next up, you want to install resistors. For a pedal, you want to go from the lowest profile components to the highest profile. So we're going to start with the resistors and diodes. I bend the legs out on the resistors so that they stay in the board when I flip it over to solder. It's a nice little trick that will save you a lot of headache if you put in a lot of resistors and you have them all fall out. If you're new to soldering, you want a hot iron and you want to hold it to the pad and then flow the solder into it. This ensures a good bond and a smooth, nice looking joint. There is a little bit of rosin that makes its way onto the board, as you can see from some of the darker staining, but it's nothing to worry about. You can clean it off, or you can just leave it like I did here. This kit does have a lot of resistors. It took a while to get all those in. It's just as easy as any pedal. There's just more of them. This pedal design uses CMOS chips for amplification, which is interesting and not something I've seen before. You want to put in the housing, the connectors for these, and then install the actual chips at the very end. I put the connectors in right after the resistors and diodes were done so that I have the most space to work. The IC sockets have a lot of legs to solder. It's not difficult, but they're close together and you want to be sure that you don't bridge any of those pins. It's good practice to have a multimeter handy to check for continuity to make sure that you haven't bridged any of those pins in your soldering. The actual CMOS chips will be installed when the pedal is fully done. Next up is the capacitors, and again we want to work from small to larger, with the ceramic caps going in first, then the film caps, and finally the electrolytic caps. I do have one minor complaint with this PCB layout, which is that some of the capacitors are placed too close to the resistors, and as you can see, they have to kind of straddle on top of them. It's not the cleanest, it doesn't affect anything, but it just seems like a minor oversight in terms of component selection or PCB layout. Once all the components are on the board, it's time to test fit in the enclosure. This kit did include rubber feet for the pots so they don't accidentally short anything out, which is a good thing. At this point, you can put it in the enclosure and solder down all the legs for the pots and the switches. Next, I'm installing the true bypass switch for this. This kit does include an extra board for wiring on the true bypass switch. It's a nice thing, and sadly, in my troubleshooting, I ended up destroying it, but I'll get into that later. One of the last steps is installing the IC chips. These do have a polarity. You want to look for this small recessed circle in one of the corners, and that will line up with the square pad on the back of the board. Otherwise, they're just press fit, no soldering needed at that point. Once I had this pedal all completed, sadly I couldn't get any sound from it, and I wasn't sure why. Now, it turns out I hadn't hooked up the EQ send, EQ return, because I thought since I wasn't using an additional EQ board, I wouldn't need that. However, they do need to be connected in order for the pedal to work. Unfortunately, after a few hours of troubleshooting and checking for continuity and making sure everything seemed like it should be working, I figured I would replace the true bypass switch because I had wired that up incorrectly on another recent pedal and thought maybe I'd done the same thing again. Well, I hadn't, I think. I don't know if it worked or not. Either way, the solution was hooking up that EQ send to the EQ return, and all was well and good, except that I destroyed a switch in the process, but live and learn. Now on to the painting. I start with a self-etching aluminum primer and then go to a regular flat black spray paint. It's not the world's most durable finish, but it looks okay and I don't have a powder coating setup. I use acrylic paint pens to do the actual line work. While I'm happy enough with the ease of use and the cost and flexibility, of course, the downside is that they can tend to splatter if they get caught on something, and I found that going over the painted enclosure with some fine sandpaper afterwards really helped to minimize that. I was trying to think of a good name for this pedal. Since it is a Darkglass design originally and then recreated as the Black Mirror, we'd kind of played out some of those references, but I was sticking with the thought and I thought about a black hole, so decided on Gravity Well and go with a little bit of a black hole space theme, which helps because it's also a black pedal, so great place to put stars. I started with these colorful squiggly lines around the bypass switch. That's the black hole part of it. Here I am doing the text, and here I am outlining the beginning of this gaseous nebula I have going on at the top of the pedal. I wanted to do something colorful and cloudy to give it that deep space feeling. This nebula part ended up being rather time-consuming, and I went back and forth on it many times to try to enhance it and make it look as good as possible, adding multiple layers and then redoing my lines as I went along. But I'm fairly happy with how it came out. It was probably the most difficult part of the design. For the text, I wanted it to look like it was kind of sucking into a black hole. It didn't maybe come out super dramatic with that theme, but if you wonder why the text is a little bit off-kilter, it's supposed to be being sucked in by this gravity well. I always approach it with some kind of a design and a name in mind, but everything has kind of come up on the spot. So if there's any mistakes or things I'm not happy with, I just have to live with them and let them be happy accidents, in the words of the great Bob Ross. I added these sort of 3D lines sucking in towards the switch to enhance the gravity well idea of the black hole, just sucking everything into the abyss of gnarly bass tone. I did the stars in gold and silver and started with these sort of lens flare, bigger stars as accent pieces, and then went around and did gold and silver dots everywhere to give it a nice starfield look. Here I am continuing to touch up on these nebulous clouds. I went back and forth on this section many times and eventually ended up at a point I was happy with, but it was layer after layer until I really got to where I thought it looked pretty cool and finished enough. I didn't get any video of adding the final control text, but I went with a minimalist L, B, and D for level, blend, and drive, and then the words attack and grunt over the switches. I also always like to add in and out, so I make sure that I'm plugging into the right side of the pedal, just in case, and a 9-volt marker because it is a 9-volt pedal. After that, I put in all the pots, and you can see the results in this lovely B-roll edit. Thank you for watching. Be sure to check out the sound demo of this pedal, and stay tuned for another pedal build coming up soon, and as always, smash like and subscribe.